وذكر فإن الذكرى تنفع المؤمنين.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وقل ربي زدني علما. Alhamdulillah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're on the 27th day of Ramadan. It's a day that also has a lot of weight, so it's a great blessing these last 10 days, the entire month, but these last 10 days are special days, especially the odd ones. So we're on our session 5 of Jawahir al-Qur'an, which are Jawhar in Arabic generally means jewel. It can also mean pearl, but he's using it specifically to mean jewel. It also means essence in theology. So like Jawharat al-Tawheed is actually, most of the commentators call Imam al-Laqani's book the pearl of Tawheed. So anything precious. So the Jawhar is the essence of something, and essences are precious. Your own essence is precious. You can lose parts of your body, which are also precious, undeniably, but they actually have monetary value in Sharia, whereas the human being the body has a monetary value, but not the soul. Soul's priceless. That's why it's called nafs, which is from a word, one of the derivations is nafis, which is precious. So the essence is something precious. So he's looking at these precious meanings that the Qur'an is filled with. So I just want to do a quick review from yesterday. He identifies these 6 aims of the Qur'an. These are the maqasid. And remember, Imam al-Ghazali is a maqasidi scholar. Like he is really somebody who's not, he was very wary of what he called the mutarassimun. And he actually denounces them. These are scholars that he felt did not look at the meanings. They were simply trapped in the form. For instance, in logic, you have formal logic and you have material logic. The formal logic, you can have absolutely sound syllogisms that are completely false. So if you don't know the material of the logic, the matter that makes up the syllogism and how that works, you'll make big mistakes in logic. The same is true in anything. The maqsad should always be uppermost. In fact, if people remember, there was a book some time ago called the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of them was begin with the end. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ said, al-umur bi maqasidiha, that matters are based on their maqasid. And so the Quran has maqasid. So maqsad is your aim. Maqsid in Arabic with the kasra is your actually physical destination. But the maqsad is your intentional destination. It's your goal. That is not a material or physical goal. It could involve materiality, but in your mind, it's where you're headed. It's not a physical movement. So he basically looks at what he calls the momentous things, these muhimma, and then what he calls the divisions that complete them. So the 3 mutammima or mutimma. So atmim or atim in the dua. Ta'rif al-mad'u ilayhi, the definition of the one whom men are called, men meaning men and women. Ta'rif al-sirat al-mustaqim, to know what the path is to the one you're called to. And then tajibu mulazamatuhu fi suruki ilayhi, that what you have to follow, what's obligatory. Because he says the path to God is mulazama and mukhalafa. So those are the 2. It's adhering to certain things and avoiding other things. And this is what is called targhib and tarhib. It's also called awamir wa nawahi. These are all terms that are used. The Quran uses awamir and nawahi. Those things we're commanded to do, and those things that we're prohibited from doing. And then he has ta'rif al-hal 'inda al-wusuli ilayhi. And then really defining the state, the hal, of the one who arrives to knowledge of God. And al-wusul it's used problematically because a lot of people misunderstand it. Wusul to God is not a physical arrival, and it means ma'rifah, that because what Imam al-Ghazali says, and it's quite beautiful, he says that there's no physical travel to God because God is أقرب إلينا من حبل الوريد. He's closer to us than the carotid artery, the thing that gives us consciousness itself. Because you cut the carotid artery off in a chokehold and a person goes unconscious. So consciousness itself is from the carotid artery, the physical awareness. And so what he says is because God is nearer to us than our jugular veins, not in any physical, because God is not in any physical space, but in reality, and he says, therefore, it's really the mithal, the likeness is a mirror. So it's like you're standing in front of a mirror, and God has put all of his attributes that he wants you to know him by, he's put them in you. وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُصْبِرُونَ, by analogy. وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى. Allah has the highest analogies. So when we hear that Allah is hearing, oh, he gave us hearing. We hear that Allah is seeing, he gave us sight. We hear that Allah is speaking, he gave us a speech. We hear that Allah is hayy, he gave us life. That all these attributes are in us. So in order for you to come to know God, you have to polish the mirror, because the reason you can't see him is because the mirror is clouded, and the mirror is your heart. So that's what you have to polish, because the heart will reflect those mirrors. So that's Imam al-Ghazali's project in a nutshell. I mean, I really brought it down to the most basic, fundamental principles. So the ta'rif ahwal al-mujibin ad-da'wa, those who answer the call. So these are the mutimma, those things that enhance the first three. So those things are the condition of those who answer the call in the dunya. So you see like Ahlullah, and you see Ahl al-Batil, Ahlul Shaitan, Awliya Allah, Awliya al-Rahman, Awliya al-Shaitan. And then the second is also letting you know about the people who reject and what happens to them. And then the proofs against them. And finally, imarat manazil al-tariq. So the manzil of the tariq is the dunya. And then, then you have the manazil on your path to Allah. And so those are the way stations in the dunya. And then you need basically zad, when khayra zad taqwa, the best provision is taqwa, and the uhba, the preparedness, the isti'dad, getting ready for the journey. Because we have the journey in the dunya, which is 60 and 70 years on average, according to the Prophet ﷺ for his ummah. Some people can live as long as 120. My own teacher, Marab al-Hajj, lived to at least, by confirmation, 109. So some people do live long lives, but most of us will live between 60 and 70 years. That's what the Prophet ﷺ said, أَعْمَارُ أُمَّتِي مَا بَيْنَ السِّتِّينِ وَالسَّبْعِينَ. And I thought about that hadith, and I realized it's actually a mercy, because that's the last decade where people generally have good energy and good health. When you get into your 70s and your 80s, some people can retain it, but a lot of people begin to break down. So there's a mercy in being taken in that 7th decade, I think, because he's all mercy, the Prophet ﷺ. And also his people were given longer reward. They get more reward for less work. We're the workers in the gospel who come at the 11th hour, and they're given the same wages as the one that worked all day, and the ones that worked all day, they get upset. Like, why are they getting that? That was Isa's, alayhi salam, Jesus' indication of the Prophet's ummah, because we're the ones that come at the 11th hour. Bu'ittu wa sa'atu ana wa sa'aka hatain, and then he put his sababa and his wusta together. I was sent in the hour, my coming in the hour is like these two, and he put them together. So those are the 6. And then, so those are the 6. And then from those, he says there's an inshi'ab. So the branching out, the shu'ab that come out of that. So the shu'ab that come out of that, like a tree. The first 3 he calls al-kibrit al-ahmar, which is basically the red sulfur, which traditionally was in sacred alchemy, it was called the philosopher's stone. It was yusma anhu wa la yura. You hear about it, but you never see it. So they say that the awliya, especially the great awliya of the ummah, they're like the kibrit al-ahmar because their company is transformative. So they can actually transform somebody who's going the wrong way and then get them to move towards the right way just by their suhbah. So that's and then he divides them into three, yawaqit al-thalath. So he's got the yaqut, which is a precious stone, the red ruby, and then the akhab. So he's got the ahmar, the akhab, which is probably wardi. It's like less than humra, they say. Some say it's gray, blue-gray, but it's basically another precious stone. It's less precious than the first one. And then finally, he uses the asfar, which is the topaz, which is for the af'al. So each one of them are precious, but they have rotab ranks. And then dhikr al-ma'ad, which is about the afterlife, eschatology, and if you want a big word for that from religious studies. So they call that eschaton in Greek is the last matters. So what happens in the afterlife. And then you have dhikr as-sirat al-mustaqim. So what's the straight path? Well, the path is the path of tazkiyah, which is sometimes called takhliyah, which is the kenosis, emptying out. So you empty out the negative qualities, and then you have the tahliyah. So the sirat al-mustaqim is basically adorning yourself with positive qualities and removing the negative qualities. And this is basically character development, but it's also spiritual development within the soul. And the result of that, if you do that path, is sometimes, not necessarily, but sometimes what's called tajliyah. And that's really what Imam al-Ghazali is indicating. That tajliyah is basically what Allah reveals himself to you. And there's an indication, there's a hadith related that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yatajalla linnasi amma wa yatajalla li Abi Bakrin khasa. Like Allah's tajliya to people is general, but to Abu Bakr it was specific. So those hadiths, I think sometimes they're attacked, but the point is that there is this tajliya for some people. They will really have very powerful experiences where they become very aware of the divine presence. And for some people, it becomes constant. It's just the way they are in the world. And then the dhikr ahwal al-awliya. Some people don't like the term saints. The sun, it comes from a word really which means holy, which is related to our word quds. And so the saint is the one that qaddasallahu sirrahu. He has sanctified his soul. So it's a perfectly good word. I think the Jews don't really have a concept. They have a concept of the zaddik, which is the righteous person, siddiq in our traditions, probably from the same root. And those are the highest of the awliya, the siddiqun after the prophets. Every prophet is a wali, right? But they're also a nabi. And then you have the awliya that are under so wilaya is muktasaba. Prophecy is mawhuba. You cannot become a prophet, no matter how hard you try, no matter how much work you did. But you can become a wali. So it's muktasaba, it's earned. And that's why the wilaya is the Prophet. People think, oh, well, he was just given. No, he earned his wilaya. His wilaya is the work that he did himself. His nubuwah is from Allah. So don't think that he's just, it was all just given to him. No, he worked. He did the night prayers. He did the charity. He did all those things. And that's iktisab for him. But his nubuwah is his isma, the fact that he's protected, all those things are just given from Allah. But his wilaya, he works, just like The other people have to work for more. And that's why, even though he was forgiven, he still stayed up at night. That's his iktisab. أَوَلَمْ أَكُنْ عَبْدًا شَكُورًا. He didn't have to do that. Or even coming back. I mean, just the fact that that he, he took on this extraordinary mantle for humanity, and his concern was ummati ummati. It was never nafsi nafsi. On the Yawm al-Qiyamah, they all say nafsi nafsi, even the prophets. The Prophet ﷺ says ummati ummati. He's the only one. So everybody else is in that other state. So looking at ahwal al-awliya, and then dhikr ahwal al-a'da, the conditions of God's enemies. So this is what happens to people that are in adawa with God, like Pharaoh. And then God's arguments, dhikr muhajjat al-kuffar. So those arguments that God gives his servants, his prophets, and then the salihin. So now we're going to look at the branching of these. So this is inshi'ab al-ulum al-diniyya. So this is the branching of the knowledges that come out of these aqsam al-ashara. The first knowledges he calls ulum al-sadaf. Now sadaf is the shell that the pearl is in. So the pearl, actually, Rumi has a beautiful, he makes this argument about the heart being like the pearl. A pearl is from sand that gets inside the sadaf, and it irritates the mollusk. So it irritates the sea creature, and so the sea creature excretes this thing to try to put off, to ward off this irritation. And so it's through that irritation that the pearl develops. So Allah is putting all these irritants in our lives, and if we respond appropriately, it will turn us into precious pearls. But if we fight it, then we're from the nakibin, the jahidin. So he calls these the sadaf sciences. So the first one, he calls it ilm kharij al-huruf. He really means here tajweed, because tajweed essentially is really about huquq al-huruf, right? The Imam al-Jazari, he says that it's i'ta'u kulli harfin haqqahu min sifatan laha wa mustahaqqahu. So the definition of tawheed is giving every letter its haqq and its mustahaq. So the haqq is what inheres in it naturally, like the Qutb Jad or the Qalqala letters. So the haqq is to, if you say, Qul huwa Allahu ahad, so there's a little bounce at the end of that. So that's the Qalqala. That's the haqq of the dal. If you don't do it, then zalamta dal, that you've oppressed the dal. So he's not going to be happy. So you learn those, because al-akhdhu bit-tajweed hatmun lazimu man lam yujawwid al-Qur'ana athimu. Imam al-Jazari says that you have to take tajweed. It's a hatmun lazimu. It's an obligation. And then he says, whoever doesn't recite the Qur'an with tajweed is athim. Now, I think out of mercy for the community, the ulama generally, not all of them, but the vast majority do say that the lahan khafi is not sinful, which means that as long as you're pronouncing the letters properly, even if you're not able to, if you really can't, then there's still tasahul in that matter. Some people can't pronounce the dad. It's a hard letter for a lot of people. So that's, and then makharij al-huruf are, the makharij al-huruf, in makharij al-huruf 17 على الذي يختاره من اختبر. So there's 17 points of articulation. There's 5 major points, and then from those 5, there's 17. And there was a khilaf. Sibawi said there were 16. Al-Farra said there were 14. But people agreed with Al-Khalil ibn Ahmad al-Farahidi, because he's the great master that he wrote the first dictionary, muwaffaq. So he's the one. And then the ilm al-lugha. Lughat al-Quran, there's just under 2,000 root words in the Quran. So in Arabic, you have roots, You have dyadic roots, and then you have the triliteral roots. So there's three. So you have like daraba, and from that you get all these permutations from that. So you have like daribun, which is somebody who's doing the darb, and then you have madrub, which is the one who's being struck, and then you have the darb, which is the actual masdar or the striking of it. So daraba, right? Daribun, darban, madruban. Like so that is learning that takes some time. That's called morphology. But the lugha he's talking about is knowing the diction, the word choice of the Qur'an. So there's words in the Qur'an like lahu. Every Arab knows lahu. If I ask, like somebody who's an Arab from Syria, what's lahu? They'll usually say, like in English, what would you say? Yeah, entertainment, right? Yeah, lahu. But in the Quran, it can mean child. It can mean wife. So you can read the Quran thinking that you know Arabic, like if you're a modern Arab and you read the Quran, like ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر. A lot of the Mufassirun say the Bahr there are the cities that are near water. It's not actually on the ocean. Others say it's, Ibn Abbas said it's قلة الأسماك in the ocean from the sins of people, that the fish diminish. So learning the language of Quran, there's a lot of nuances in the Quran. Like for instance, Allah says, لا يسخر قوم من قوم. Let not a people mock another people. So it says qawm. But then it says, وَلَا نِسَاءٌ, so it separates qawm from nisa. So why would that be? Because qawm are only the paternal side of a group. So like the akhwal are not from the qawm. The maternal side aren't from the qawm. In the Quran, he's the only prophet that addresses them. He doesn't say ya qawmi because he didn't have a father from them. He only had a mother. So they're not his qawm. So that's an example of the lugha that takes a lot of time to learn. It's called fiqh al-lugha, and then also the just dictionary definitions of it. And then you have nahu, which is a combination really generally. Nahu is i'rab, but it's also sarf. So nahu is grammar, and it includes both syntax, which is the way sentences work, and inflections, declensions, conjugations, and then also it includes morphology. So he considers all of these shell sciences because they're not at the essence. You're learning them to get to the essence. They're necessary. Just like the body is a shell, but the body is for the reason. So the shell is important. You can't ignore it, but it's a shell. You shouldn't be worshiping it or serving it as if it's the most important thing in your life, which a lot of people do. So grammar, and then grammar is basically, there's you learn it. It's actually not that terribly hard to learn grammar. It takes some time, but it's a relatively straightforward thing. But the problem with Arabic is it is a vast language, and you will always come across things that, unless you're a true master, you just haven't seen them before. And you can study. I've been working with Arabic for 40 years now, and I feel like I'm a beginner. And I'm not saying that out of any humility. I'm saying that just as a true statement. It's an ocean. And so, but you can learn these things. And we have beautiful books that our scholars have developed to teach Arabic in the tradition I studied in. I studied the Ajurumiyya, the Mulhat al-I'rab, the Alfiyya. Those are the traditional books that you study. My own teacher wrote a beautiful commentary on the Alfiyya, but he was a great grammarian. Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya is a great grammarian. It's amazing. His knowledge of Arabic is actually quite stunning. I mean, I'll give you one example of his knowledge of Arabic. So he studied with a man named Muhammad Budshain, who's a great scholar from Eastern Mauritania. He wrote several poems, didactic poems in Arabic, arajis. And I found some online, like they had, and I got really excited about it. And one of them was it was 1,000 lines, 1,000 lines of poetry on ishtiqaq. So it's all the derivations. And then the other one was on it was on morphology. So it was a very sophisticated text. I think it was 700 lines. So I got really excited and I went and I said, oh, you won't believe what I found and then I showed it to him and he looked at it and then he handed it to me and he started reciting it from memory. And he kept going for quite some time and then he stopped and he said, Alhamdulillah, I learned those from my teacher because my teacher wrote those. So I memorized those when I was very young. And that's in a branch, just a far'i. It's not that's on top of all the other things. Those are things that experts study over and above. So, but grammar is very important, and I would really highly recommend people. Even English grammar is important. People don't realize that you can't have a culture without grammar. You cannot. If you look at the Supreme Court justices, one of the things that they have to know is grammar. In fact, Antonin Scalia was a serious grammarian. His son did a PhD in grammar. His book, Reading Law, a lot of it is grammatical. We had a case in, not me, but our civilization. There was a case in Massachusetts of an Oxford comma, some call it the Harvard comma, which is after, when you have three things, like he's intelligent, comma, personable, comma, and young. So some people will just not put a comma on that last one between the second and the third and just have the conjunction and. So there was a case, it was a multi-million-dollar case, and they lost the case because there was an omission of an Oxford comma. And so they conflated the two. It was a dispute over wages, overtime. And so because they were put together, it could have been interpreted that they were the same thing as opposed to two separate things, which the Oxford comma would have given them. That was a serious case. They lost. I mean, luckily they had a lawyer that knew grammar, because Brian Garner, who's he's probably the greatest American grammarian. He goes around teaching lawyers grammar because they don't teach grammar anymore. And it's a tragedy. And you know, minority communities that don't have standard English are handicapped because of that. And so these people that say, oh, these are, you know, this is the language that they should be taught in and things like that, is a crime against those people because it will hold them back. And that's what it's designed to do. So grammar is, it's a birthright, really. People should be able to learn. And this idea that people can't learn grammar, so you're saying, what, they're too stupid? Like they can't learn it? I mean, that in itself is an insult, to say, oh, they're incapable of learning, because it's not true. They're perfectly capable of learning. So, ilm al-tafsir al-zahir, this is another one. So knowing the outward tafsir. This is from the shell sciences. And then he has ulum al-jawhar wal-lubab. So these are really at the essence. And then he's got two. He begins with the sufla, for I don't know why. He must have a reason for doing that, as opposed to the ulya. I suppose to move you up to it. So the tabaqa sufla are the ulum al-tawabi' al-mutimma, for the sciences of those three divisions. In the six, remember there were three, the mutimma, so those are the three in that. And then the second is tabaqat al-ulya, which are sawabiq wal usul min al-ulum al-muhimma. So those are the three. So remember these, so you have to keep in mind the 6 aims. So the ulya, the higher ones, deal with the top 3 aims, which is knowing God, knowing the path to God, and then knowing the state of the people that get to God. And then the sufla is those lower 3 aims. So in the sufla, Ma'rifat qasas al-Quran, knowing the stories of the Quran. So there's a lot of stories in the Quran about those who deny, and then also God's arguments. So there's the Qusas al-Mustaqim studies these syllogisms in the Quran, and Allah uses enthymemes, which are diminished syllogisms. It's called the Qiyas Naqis. So He uses it in the Quran to show people, that the reason is logic. There's an argument that people make that arguments for the existence of God are, you can't ever arrive at this demonstrative proof that God exists. The point of the arguments for the existence of God, which are actually quite compelling, and anybody that says otherwise has never really studied them in any deep way. They kind of, these 5 arguments of Aquinas or the Kalam cosmological argument, they're serious arguments. But the point is not to convince you, because the believer is not going to be, a disbeliever is not going to be convinced by those arguments. The point is to let believers know that your faith is rational. That's the point. The point of those arguments is not to convince you that God exists. You already believe He exists. The point is to show you that your belief is not simply blind faith. It's based on intelligent reasoning. And so your faith is actually, it's rational. Because the definition of faith to these materialists and these atheists is, they believe in something that has no proof. It has a dialectical proof. It might not have an apodictic or what they call demonstrative proof. It has a dialectical proof, which if they teach logic, people would know what these terms are. They used to teach logic. My grandfather, my great-grandfather, my grandmother, I inherited her logic book from high school. They used to teach these things to people, but they took them out. Why did they take them out? That's a question for people to really genuinely ask. Why did they get rid of logic? If you get rid of logic, there's a sign all over this town that says human beings are not illegal. And that's a reference to the idea of an illegal immigrant. That's a logical fallacy. It's a fallacy of equivocation. Nobody's saying human beings are illegal. The immigration is what's illegal, not the human being. But they put these things up, and then you're just wondering, it doesn't mean anything, right? So logic is really important. That's why Imam al-Ghazali, he wrote 5 books on logic and really considered it an extremely important science. So al-Iqtisad fi al-i'tiqad, so he wrote these 2. The Risala al-Qudsiyya is the Qawa'id al-Aqa'id. It's a lesser book. The Iqtisad fi al-i'tiqad is his higher level. So he really, it's a very important book, and it becomes really foundational for books of Kalam that follow it, because he introduced some new things into Kalam. And then Ilm al-Hudud. And remember, Imam al-Ghazali was not a proponent of Kalam. And there are Salafi people that attack Kalam. Imam al-Ghazali would agree with them in principle that Kalam is not something that everybody should study. But he felt that it was necessary for a certain segment to study so that they could refute. If you don't study philosophy, how do you refute the philosophers? Radd al-Shubuhat is, blood is no argument. So you have to know in order to be able to refute. If you don't know the debate between nominalism and essentialism, you won't know why people are arguing that gender is fluid. Because that's a statement. How do you deconstruct that statement? Well, if you're a nominalist and don't believe that there's some essential nature to human beings, then gender could be fluid. If I don't feel like a man, then I don't have to be a man. I can feel like a woman or feel like a non-binary. But if you actually believe that, no, God has essentialized you, and you're biologically determined, and that's your essence, whether you like it or not. If you don't, then you've got a psychological, which it used to be considered an illness. But now, because of the current environment, they say, no, this is normal. But a lot of people feel like, this can't be normal. So for us as Muslims, we have to stick to our beliefs. We can't let the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, determine our beliefs. We cannot allow our beliefs to shift because of the shifting tides of whatever the opinions of the people are. So that's very important. And then he has the ilm al-hudud and mawdu'a al-ikhtisas bil-amwal wa nisa. So transactional law, things that relate to marriage and things like that. And then he wrote, for that, he wrote, what he's showing you here is he's given a complete holistic program to deal with all these issues. I mean, it's quite, the more you study this man, the more you have to marvel at what he has accomplished, because it really is quite stunning. So he wrote the Basit, the Wasit, and the Wajiz. And these are all, these are his books of fiqh, the detailed, the concise, and then the mediator between the two, which is the Wasit. So these are in his furu'. And then he has the Rub' al-Jinayat in the jurisprudence. It's a very small section on what we would call here the criminal code. And then Rub' Nikah, these are the ikhtisasat bin nisa. So these relate specifically to marriage and the rights of women. The vast majority of rights in marriage are women's rights. The men's rights in marriage, he does have some rights, but they're very limited compared to the woman. Her rights, if you study Sharia properly, you will see that the vast majority of rights are to protect women and children. And then you have Rub' al-Mu'amalat, which is, that shouldn't be quarter on crime. That's a mistake in the thing. That should be on the transactions, like all the things that relate to wealth. I mean, obviously theft and things like that is part of that, but that's in the other Rub' al-Jinayat. So then the Tabaqat al-Ulya. So that's he's looking at those, the Sufla. Now the higher ones. And these are Ashrafuha li'annahu ilm al-maqsad. So this is the highest because this is the knowledge of the purpose of why the prophets are sent. They're sent to teach us our Lord. That's the purpose of the prophets. They're sent to teach us our Lord. So that's knowledge of God in the last day, and then knowledge of the Sirat al-Mustaqim, which has ma'rifat tazkiyat al-nafs and qat' al-aqabat al-sifat al-muhlikat. So these are the things that are destructive. So that's tazkiyah, or it's sometimes called takhliya, and then tahliya. The purification of the heart, and then removal of the destructive qualities. What happened? So that is the removal of the destructive quality. And then you have tahliya, purification of the soul. So tazkiyatun nafs is basically takhliya and tahliya. Removal of destructive qualities, purification of positive qualities. And then you have the highest, which is ma'rifah of Allah, ilmu dhat. And those are in all of the ayahs. He identifies all these ayahs, by the way. So those top three that are in the olive color, those are the ilm ad-durar. He calls those the pearls. These are the jewels. And this is the book, is the pearls, the jewels and the pearls. So, and then ilm al-akhirah. So, there you have it. And now you have Bahr al-Af'al. So first you had the ilm al-dhat. Now you have ilm al-Af'al. And, oh, sorry, we're still, okay. So these are the sciences that come out of his works. So you have medicine, which is the science of health. And then you have astronomy, which is studying the cosmos and looking at the heavens, you know, he says, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Imam al-Laqani, انظر إلى نفسك ثم انتقل إلى العالم العلوي ثم السفلي تجد به صنعا بديع الخلق بديع الحكم ولكن به عليه قام دليل العدم. So he says that, you know, that you have the I'm fasting, so I'm starting to, because last night was anyway, I'm starting to lose my this is a weakness of human beings. Take food. All I really need is tea. Like I can go without food, but tea is a little tough. So where were we? So these are the bahar of his af'al. Ilm al-tashri', anatomy. And then also all these obscure sciences, nuclear physics and other things. And also you have the ulum al-ghamida. So then في وجه التسمية بالألقاب التي لقب به أقسام القرآن. So everything in the world of possession, this is called alam al-mulk, right? Alam al-mulk wa shahada. Mulk is what you can see. Anything you can see is part of the mulk. And obviously what you can see on a microscope. Alam al-ghayb is what you cannot see. That's called the malakut. So he's saying that the سبب التعبير عن معاني عالم الملكوت في القرآن بأمثلة من عالم الشهادة. So why the entities of the invisible world are explained in Quran by means of similitudes from the visible world. So whenever Allah is trying to explain to us the unseen world, He uses the visible world to teach us analogies, qiyas, because this is the great genius of the human being, is that we're able to work in analogies. This is how He's created us. So how to find the connection between the visible and the invisible worlds? So the know with certainty, he says, that the secrets of the visible world are veiled from the souls which are defiled by love of the world. So hubb ad-dunya will actually be a hijab. It will veil you from the knowledge of the malakut. It will veil you. The shells of the Quran are not opened at all to reveal its jewels to those who are unmindful. So the shell, there's people that can learn the shell knowledges, but to open the shell and get the jewels, that is work. That's the ghaus, right? So he uses these allegories of jewels and valuables in the Quran. So here he has for us the red brimstone, al-kibrit al-ahmar, which again has the three, and then the tiryaq al-akbar, which is the antidote. Those are all of the reasons why you should believe in the Quran. And they cure the destructive poisons entering your mind. So it protects you from all those negative ideas that are out there. And then al-misk al-alfar, which is, these are shay yastashabuhu al-insan. The misk al-adfar is something that those of you who have traveled to certain places, there are certain people that have this misk, which is not, you can't buy it in the marketplace. And there's also places where you can smell it. There are places in Medina where you can smell it. There's actually a place in Baqiyah where it's very strong, and there's a place at Uhud, if you go to Hamza, Sayyidina Hamza's grave. And the first time that we were there, because we were told you have to go a certain time, which is when it comes, we literally, and somebody's here who was with me, we literally almost passed out. It was so strong. And it's something people have access to. It's not something like that you can't smell. And it's not from this world. And it's saints, you know, the Christian saints that are these pre-Islamic saints, their places have them as well. The Christians know about this because they have the same thing. So this is something Allah gives certain people. Imam Nafi', when he spoke, people could smell it from his mouth. So It's just by Allah. And then the oud. So these are what happens when, these shayateen get what they deserve, which is a great blessing. So the red brimstone, that which turns the essence of the soul from the vices of a beast and the error of ignorance to the purity of the angels and their spirituality. Because we are between the angels. We have an angelic nature, which is our immaterial nature. And then we have our bestial nature, which is our material nature. Allah's made us a hybrid. So we have this hylomorphic coming together. Allah calls it a khalq jadid, right? ثُمَّ أَنشَأْنَاكَ خَلْقًا آخَرَ. Like we created you another creation. So when the ruh was blown into the material body, it became another creation. So we are this coming together of the material and the immaterial into one. So we have the gravitational pull of our materiality, and then we have the spiritual pull of our immateriality. And so depending on which one you feed, like if you're feeding the bestial, it gets stronger and stronger. If you feed the other one, it gets stronger and stronger. So one pulls you up. لا تنفذون إلا بسلطان. You can't penetrate it unless you have sultan. So it takes power. And then the other one will pull you down and destroy you. So that's the red brimstone. And then the cures for the poison of heresy, passions, and errors entering the soul. That's what the Tiryaq al-Akbar does. And then the fame of a person of knowledge spreads everywhere, like musk, even if that person prefers obscurity. So Ibn Ata'illah says that he said, Man kan yuhib al-khumul fahuwa abd al-khumul. Khumul to modern Arabs means laziness. But in traditional Arabic, it means, like if you say in Saudi Arabia, khamil, they think it means lazy. Is that Syria too? Yeah. So khamil. But khumul is actually somebody nobody knows about. So, طُوبَى لِمَنْ أَخْمَرَ اللَّهُ ذِكْرَهُ. It's a blessing to be obscure. It's a tribulation to be well known. But he says, إِن كُنْتَ تحب الخمول فأنت عبد الخمول وإن كنت تحب الظهور فأنت عبد الظهور وعبد الله سواء عليه أظهره أو أخمله. يعني the abd of Allah, it's the same whether he becomes well known or whether he's kept in obscurity. It shouldn't be something you seek. If you seek it, you're sick. So that is and one of the ways that it spread is through al-sinat al-husad. So the people that envy the person, they'll actually, they say that's the fire that lights the oud, that burns the fragrance. And so the aloe wood is the smoke that rises from the ashes of God's punishment of the hypocrites and his enemies, and it brings great benefit to the believers. So how much time do I have left? 10 minutes. So the benefit of employing allegories in the Qur'an, rumuz are symbols. The Arabs have a name, Ramzi. In Egypt they use that name. Rumuz are symbols. And so, what's the reason, right? Bayan sabab juhud al-mulhidin bil usul al-diniyya. So, what is that reason? So he says these allegories open the doors of the unveiling of the seas of meanings of the Quran to you and show how to dive into these seas. One of the things that the great Moroccan Sheikh of the 20th century, Ibn al-Habib, said, إِنَّمَا الْكَوْنُ مَعَانٍ قَائِمَةٌ بِالصُّوَرِ كُلُّ مَنْ يُدْرِكُ هَذَا كَانَ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْعِبَرِ. That creation is only images, meanings set up in images. So these are suwar. This is all forms. But there's meanings behind those forms. The ma'na inheres in the form. Just like you have formal logic, material logic. The material logic is the ma'na that inheres in the formal. So this is everywhere. And you could look at it in the four causes that our scholars took from the Greeks but used in our tradition, the material, the efficient, formal, and final. So the formal, That's the formal cause of tells you what it is. But the final is what's the meaning of it? What's it for? The material is what's it made of. The efficient is who produced it. But that final is, that's the end. That's the maqsad. That's the ma'na. That's the purpose. And so, how can some verses be preferred to others if they are all Allah's words? That's a good question. So how can you have some, if it's all Qur'an and it's all kalam Allah and it's all a sifa of Allah that's qa'ima bi nafsi, how do you have some better than others? Well, the prophetic traditions have pointed to the nobility of some verses and the manifold multiplication of reward for recitation. So there's verses that are held over other verses. Like prophets are all the same in their prophecy, but some are better than others in their tafdeel. But they're all the same. The Prophet said, "La tufaddiluni ala Yunus ibn Matta." Don't prefer me over Yunus ibn Matta. And there's riwayas about Moses. Don't say I'm better than Moses. In his nubuwwah. So they're the same in their nubuwwah, but then there's darajat within that. So we're all equal in our humanity, but we're not equal in our accomplishments. We're not equal in our virtue and our vice. Some people are vicious, some people are virtuous, and some people are struggling between the two impulses. This is you cannot equate. هل يستوي الذين يعلمون والذين لا يعلمون? Are they the same, those who know and those who don't know? Can you equate them? You can't. So this whole idea, the modern world wants to level everything. They want to say, oh, everybody's equal. They're equal in their humanity. But the Prophet said, "Umirtu an unazzila an-nas manazilahum." I was commanded to treat people according to their station. This is the hierarchy. And this whole attack on hierarchy is to destroy civilization. So everybody's equal in their slavery. That's communism. Communism is that everybody's equal. They want to level everything. And then all animals are created equal, but some are more equal than others, right? That's Animal Farm. That's the whole point of that book, was to explain to you what they were really up to, right? Once the Great Revolution's over, the pigs show up. You get rid of the king, and then you get, they got rid of Malik Idris. They said, Iblis wala Idris. That was a slogan in the Libyan revolution. So Allah gave them Iblis. And they had him for 42 years. So he got rid of the king, and then what do you want to do? Make his son the next ruler. It's all lies. And that's why people really need to read history and to understand that these are all tricks of Iblis. So just like we're not equal in our accomplishments, the Qur'an is equal in that it's all revelation, it's all from God, but it's not equal in the manazil. There are some verses that are over other verses. You can't equate Ayatul Kursi with the verse about debt. You know, the Dain verse, the longest verse in the Qur'an, in Surah Al-Baqarah. You can't equate the two. One is about God and the other is about human transactions, but they're both revelation. So we honor both of them, but we recognize the superiority because of the Prophet ﷺ, had he not told us. So we have Fatihatul Kitab. The Prophet said it's Afdal al-Quran. There's a hadith, a man who's coming out of this masjid, and the Prophet ﷺ said, "Can I teach you the Afdal al-Quran?" And he taught him Fatiha. And then you have Ayatul Kursi, which is Sayyida Ayatul Quran. It's the Ayat al-Quran. It's literally the, it's the Sayyida. It's the princess of the verses of the Quran. So the master, the mistress. And then Yasin, there's an indication that it's Qalb al-Quran in the hadith. And then you have Qul huwa Allahu ahad, ta'dilu thuluth al-Quran. It equals 1/3 of the Quran. Ikhlas is a miracle of theology. So when we look at, we've got 5 minutes left. So I think I'll save this for tomorrow, because this is This is worth taking time with, inshallah. Do we have questions? Mm-hmm. You briefly spoke about Imam al-Ghazali's teachers in Sharia sciences. Who were his teachers in Tasawwuf? Are there still spiritual silsilas with al-Ghazali in their chain? His own brother was a great master, and they were very close. So his brother was a master. The teachers that he studied with were masters. So his outward teachers were also inward masters. I mean, these were some of the greatest Muslims in our history that he studied with. So Radkhani, who he studied with, would have probably been he learned tasawwuf early on. So it's not like he suddenly had this realization. No, but he did have a crisis of epistemology, of like how we know, and came to the conclusion that intuitive knowledge was the highest if it was sound. But intuitive knowledge is very dangerous because a lot of people can be deluded, and he was very aware of that. And he was also a great critic of Sufis. I mean, even though he recognized tasawwuf is an important science, he also saw the inherent dangers in it and warned about several things. The great scholars of our tradition were generally practitioners of tasawwuf. To say they weren't is just, it means you know nothing about Islamic history. You just haven't read tabaqat literature, you haven't really studied. But the Sufis also had some pretty significant deviance. And it's because of the nature of Sufism, it's very easy to lose your way. And so you had antinomial Sufis that abandoned Sharia, people that said, you know, I've reached knowledge of God, I no longer have to pray, things like this. So you all have that. These traditionally were called mutasawwifa. The Sufiya were kind of people that were seen as over, you know. So, but you have tasawwuf is a very important science. We're just finishing a critical edition of, I think, one of the best books I've ever read, which is by Ahmed Zarruq, Sidi Ahmed Zarruq, who was called Muhtasib al-Ulama wal-Awliya, like the ombudsman of the awliya and the ulama, because he was a great alim, but he was also a serious practitioner of spiritual tradition. But he wrote a book which is a commentary on Ibn Banna al-Saraqosti's book called Al-Mabahath al-Asliya, the basic research or the foundational studies. And that's a book on all the rules of tasawwuf. The last section, which is called The Sufis of This Age, which was written in the 9th century. I mean, he just says, عاش بها قوم بخير عيشة فصيرت من بعدهم معيشة يدعى الذي يمشي عليه سالك وسالكها اليوم حزب هالك. Like he says that this used to be the best path. Now it's just a means of livelihood for people. And then he says, you call the one who goes on this path a salik, but the people, which means the wayfarer. But the saliku al-yawm, the people on it today, are halik. They're perishing. So he argues that they lost their rigor, that they don't. By the 19th century, you see a complete lack of rigor in our books. They're amazing, and I swear to God, and I'm not saying this in any, I would not be worthy of being a student of Imam al-Bajuri. You know, I mean, I really, unless maybe just out of being a convert, he kind of had some pity on me, like he'd see it as mu'allafat qulubuhum, you know, atasaddaq alayhi, because he's from you give him zakat because he's a convert. But you know, he's a great scholar. These were amazing scholars, but the hadith rigor really diminishes greatly in the latter period. They quote hadiths that, and I'm not like, I quote some of the hadiths that I've quoted, but I point out that they're weak. It's important to point that out. But very often they just say qala Rasulullah, and they don't really let you know that this isn't. So the Sufis are I think they're very important and historically, and they're asking, do the silsilas still exist? Alhamdulillah, the chain that the sanad that I have from Sheikh Bayy bin Sadiq has Imam al-Ghazali in it. So alhamdulillah, I'm in a chain. I'm unworthy of it, and I admit that without any false humility. But this is the time we're living in, so it's the latter days. The only consolation is for teachers, that lousy teachers is generally the students are pretty lousy too. So we're all just lousy together. Can you recommend translations of Qur'an based on someone's level of Islamic understanding, starting from a convert or beginner or advanced? There's good translations. Abd al-Halim is good. I mean, all of them have limitations. It's just, there's no way you can translate the Qur'an. I truly believe the Qur'an is untranslatable. I believe that. Arabic is too vast. I mean, when we get into the Fatiha, when we were putting it together, the slides with Sidi Ismail, may Allah reward him, he's been staying up all night, to do this, to make this. So please pray for him, may Allah bless him. And he just did a fantastic job. But we were looking at, the translation. He used one of the, I won't say who, but he used one of the translations for Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. It said, we worship you. To you we worship. And I said, no, you have to put alone. Because iyaka, the fact that it's muqaddam ala na'budu, means alone. It's for hasar. And that's unique to Arabic as far as English goes. Like we can't say it in English without adding another word. But in Arabic, if I say, if Fatiha has said, na'buduka wa nasta'inuka, that could mean I worship you, but I also worship Lat and Uzza and Manat. In Arabic, you could say that. Whereas if you say, Iyaka na'budu, you alone, because it's muqaddam. So the mansub is muqaddam. And then Iyaka, look at using the damir there with Iyaka, because just the fact that it's not muttasal with it, it's indicating a transcendence in the actual calligraphy. Because if I said na'buduka, the kaf is connected to me, to my verb. Na'buduka, that kaf is muttasal. But when you say iyaka, the kaf is separate. It's munfasal. And that's just Arabic. It's an amazing language. Alhamdulillah. So the silsila are there. I mean, I think you have to be careful with a lot of, personally, I think people have to be very careful. I've always warned people about getting involved. You have to, because there are a lot of fraudulent people out there. It's just the way it is. And so you just have to be very careful. But there are genuine people that can help you on your path to Allah. And their suhbah can be very valuable. Can you recommend, so the translation for a convert, I mean, like I said, I personally prefer Arbery. I don't know if he was a crypto-Muslim. I kind of have a suspicion. I don't know. He never declared his Islam, so I can't really say that with any certainty, but he certainly indicates the solace that he got from the Qur'an in his introduction. It's a beautiful translation. I think he knew Arabic very well. Pickthall's is good. He also knew Arabic quite well. He was also a well-known novelist, Pickthall, an English novelist. Abd al-Halim, I think, is good. I think Thomas Cleary's is very interesting. I have found a few things that I thought were problematic, but overall, it's a very interesting tafsir. He's got a beautiful, I love his style of writing. He's a minimalist. He's got a very beautiful way of wording things. He also did a gender-neutral translation, which can be cumbersome in things like Ayatul Kursi, where you have a lot of pronouns. But he wanted to do it to remove any he, so that people, modern people reading that could be a barrier from them reading the Qur'an. So I think it was a very interesting idea behind it. And then the study of Qur'an, there's people that attack it. It's an extraordinary work of scholarship. And to deny that, I think, is لا تبخسوا الناس أشياءهم. Don't deny people their due. It's an extraordinary, and several of the people that worked on it were not perennialists. There is some perennialism in it, which is obviously problematic. I think most people will recognize it pretty clearly. All you have to do is Google perennialism and read about it, and then you'll know what verses. But there's not that much in it. So it has a lot of really good tafsir from classical tafsirs. So I think it is a very useful book. And I heard some people, I think what needs to be done is some qualified people need to go through it and then point out some of the problems with it. I think that would be the best thing to do, so that people could read it with that. It would only be a short essay on some of the problems that are in the effort. But it's an incredible, stunning piece of scholarship, and I don't know, to deny that's just, to me, it's not really fair. What should be the project be for Muslim scholars in our age? Does the revival of Ghazali's project suffice? I mean, that's a really good question. I think we have to pray that Allah brings everybody has to know their place. Like, to get another Ghazali that's going to be from God. If God sends him, marhaban bihi. He'll probably be denounced by most of the scholars of today, if they tried to do the project. But I'm going to stick with Imam al-Ghazali. I know my limits. So everybody has to come to terms with their own mediocrity at a certain point in their life. Exceptional people are just, they're very rare. They do come along, and if you can identify them in your age and then serve them, that's what I've tried to do. I think one of the most exciting. I really believe that Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya is a mujaddid. I mean, and people can say what they want. I think they don't know who he is, and he's also a mujtahid. So they have to be careful, because he's working with a set of criteria that you don't understand. I mean, I recently watched something of some people criticizing his work, and it was clear to me that they didn't know usul al-fiqh just from listening to the criticisms. That they didn't understand the maqasid tradition. So there's a lot of. It's good to know who you are. Delusion is real. We're all deluded to some degree. For people that know homeopathy, there's a really interesting Sankaran. He's a Indian homeopath who wrote a whole book about really the foundational problem with human beings is delusion. And so, he has a whole system of homeopathy of getting to the delusion of that patient in front of you. What's his fundamental delusion, and then relating it to the actual remedies. It's very interesting. So people, and then we don't know very much. I mean, we can think we know a lot, but we don't. Our knowledge is very limited. Even the most learned people, an immunologist, what they know about the immune system, really? The immune system? I mean, you think you can learn it just from studying anatomy and physiology, and because they're looking at it and they're just assuming things. They don't really know. I mean, there's so many things we don't know. And scientists are very arrogant often because they think they know, and they don't. All they can do is do their best, but there should always be humility. And the great ones are humble. I mean, if you look at somebody like Richard Feynman, who was he won the Nobel Prize for quantum electrodynamics. I actually did his course on physics. It's recorded, so it was a course that he used to teach at Cal Poly. Brilliant man. I mean, he's at the highest levels of physics, and his definition of physics was our expanding horizon, the expanding horizon of our own ignorance. In other words, the more we know, the more we find out, the more we find out, the less we know. That's what he was saying. So for instance, biologists like Darwin thought that when you go into the cell, it's going to get simpler and simpler. He thought, because they didn't have microscopes that we have today. So he thought it would get simple, because he thought his whole theory is based on simple to complex. But what they found is the opposite. The deeper you go, the more complex it gets. One cell has more genetic information than the 25 million volumes in the Library of Congress. The complexity is beyond belief. So we should just admit we're ignorant. You've only been given a little bit of knowledge. And then we get arrogant with knowledge. Knowledge should, if you ever watch, because I lived in a date orchard when I was in the Emirates. I was an imam in a masjid there, and the people that prayed were all Afghan people. And I was Maliki, so I prayed with my hands at my side, and then I read Warsh. So they were convinced I was just a total ignoramus. So they went and brought this sheikh to come test me, Sheikh Jalaluddin. He was an Afghan imam in another masjid. And so he came and he gave me a test. And then he said, no, he told them all, he's okay. And after that, they'd bring me trays of dates and treated me really nicely. But this date orchard that I was in, the masjid was in the middle of a date orchard. So dates, when they first shoot, it's very straight up. But as the dates ripen, it gets heavier and heavier. And it gets lower and lower. That's why the Prophet said the mu'min is like a date palm. So the more knowledge you get, the humbler you should get. Because the more you know, you don't know. A little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. Drink deep or taste not the Pyrean spring. For shallow draughts intoxicate the brain, and drinking deeply sobers us again. Right? The Pyrean spring was in the mythologies, the source of knowledge. So drink deep or don't drink, because a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. Where can one start learning Islamic philosophy? I would first learn Islamic tradition. Like philosophy is I would not suggest trying to learn Islamic philosophy. I would try to learn Fard Ain. Once you've learned Fard Ain, you can study other things, but Fard Ain first. And then I would really recommend, we have a philosophy track at Zaytuna in the MA program. The reason for that is we need to have scholars that understand the current worldview. You have to understand it. Like Ghazali, who learned the peripatetic philosophy and then wrote his book, Tahafut al-Falasifa. If you don't have people that know it, how can they refute it, respond to it? We see Muslims now drinking the Kool-Aid in so many areas. Really adopting things that are very alien to our tradition. So these are problems that we have, in our community. So, inshallah, may Allah reward all of you, bless all of you, inshallah, increase us, elevate us. Inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless your Ramadan these last days. Inshallah, we have a few more days. Allah says, Ayyam ma'dudat, they're few days. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, give you tawfiq. I would really hope that people that are watching will support the college. I hope that you send a gift, even if it's just a small gift. There's a lot of barakah. You never know where the barakah is. But whatever you're able to do, please help the college. We're really trying to do something I think is very important here. And we're stewards for now. People are going to come after us. We're building so people after us won't have to build. So I hope they appreciate the works. Because I'm just completely in awe of what Imam al-Ghazali did. And I saw something when I first read it, it made me cry. He said that the work that I've done has been done largely without help. And had I had a'wan, I could have done so much more. Had I had helpers. And the Prophet ﷺ told us that towards the latter days, he said that people would have the reward of 50. And they said 50 of them or of us? He said of you. And they couldn't understand, wow, how is that? He said, you have helpers to do your work. He said, they won't have any helpers. So inshallah, whatever help you can give, it really is beneficial. And I also want to thank Harun and Naeem and all the technical people that have been working here. May Allah bless them, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.